Hello friends and welcome to today's session in the Sciative Knowledge Series. I'm Dr. Anshu Jalura, founder of Sciative Solutions, and I'll be host in today's session. Today is the 13th session in the Sciative Knowledge Series. We at Sciative Solutions are committed to bringing amazing speakers in this knowledge series on pricing best practices, and along these lines, our distinguished speaker today is Mike Sherman. Mike has been based in Asia since 1997, working across the region and has extensive experience in the FMCG, CPG, retail, financial services, and telecom industries. Mike began his career at Procter& and Gamble, where he managed both new and established brands. He has spent 17 years with McKinsey and Company, while there he created their Asia Pacific marketing practice and was a founder of their global CRM practice. Mike was also global head of knowledge management for Sinovate, where he led efforts to improve the value clients obtained from research. At Singtel and Hong Kong Telecom, he drove the use of both customer data and customer research to help the business understand customers and customer data opportunities. Mike has an MBA, high distinction from Harvard Business School, and two bachelor's degree magna cum laude from the Wharton School and College, University of Pennsylvania. He is a frequent speaker at conferences, has published several times in the McKinsey Quarterly on marketing issues in developing and Asian markets. He is the former board chair of AFS USA, a leading high school foreign exchange organization and an avid traveler, having visited over 125 countries. Mike, it's an honor for us to have you as a speaker today.
Great, thank you, Dr. Allura, and I'm pleased to be here. So today I'm going to share some practical lessons learned from my too many years experience working in pricing and in other parts of consumer analytics. So I titled this 10 Things I Wish Someone Had Told Me About Pricing. And I'm going to go through those lessons, some of which are specific about pricing, some of which are applied to pricing and are broad. So there's 10, I'm showing you the 10 now. I'm not going to go through them now, rather this is a summary we'll use at the end. So here's the first point, which is pricing matters. So if we look at this chart and we say, what's the impact of a 1% increase in price for an average Fortune 1000 company? So 1% increase in price creates a profit increase of 8.6%. Again, this is using average economics in terms of fixed costs and variable costs and operating profit. So 1% increase in price gets you a profit increase of 8.6%. This is important because if we look at the next page, this is the most powerful lever if you just look at a 1% improvement in price, variable cost, volume, or fixed cost. Right? So that the 8.6% you get in price is almost 3 times what you get from a 1% increase in volume. Now, I'm not suggesting they're equally easy, but I'm suggesting just that the power of the pricing lever is often underappreciated. However, just as an improvement in 1% is very powerful, a reduction in 1% is equally destructive of value. So if your volume goes down 1%, you lose 2.8% of your profit, but you lose 1% in price and your margins go down by 8.6%. And unfortunately, when you look at pricing, more often than not, rather than capturing the 1% on the upside, we see price wars, destructive price wars, and you see that the prices, the effect on margin can be substantial. So pricing matters. And it also matters because if we look at the average price volume trade-off, so let's just look at a 5% decrease in price. To break even, I need a 19% improvement in volume. That's an elasticity of 3.7. So 3.7 times 5 gets you 18.6. It is rare to see an elasticity of 3.7. Frankly, an elasticity of 1 is generally pretty good. And so this again points to the danger of price wars and not getting your price right, because not getting your price right can leave a lot of money on the table, and you are unlikely to make it up in volume except if you're sure you can, which is to say that I'll show you some examples to the opposite, but just assuming sort of I can make up price and volume is often dangerous. So the first point is that pricing matters. Second point, and throughout this, I'm going to talk about outputs. I'm going to talk about end result, not tools. So Harvard Business School professor Ted Levitt said, people don't want to buy a quarter-inch drill. They want to buy a quarter-inch hole. What he meant by that is we need to think about the end result of what we're doing. Right? And it's not that tools are unimportant, but tools are a means to the end result. And so I'm going to show you end result today. Too often when we talk about technical pricing, we end up talking about the tools. We talk about how fast the drill is and all sorts of things about the drill, which are only important in the context of what kind of hole you're trying to drill. And often, if you start with what kind of hole you're trying to drill, you may find out you don't need as fancy a tool as as you might use. And so, second point is to think about the output, and then think about what tools are appropriate, rather than starting with tools and techniques. Third point, as we think about pricing analytics, but this is a broader point as we think about generally business analytics, that BS is more important than statistical significance. Now, by BS, I don't mean what you're thinking. BS means business significance. So business significance is, does it change the business decision? Right? Statistical significance, as those will know, studied stats, right, is because of sampling error. If I repeat an analysis, is a difference likely to remain a difference, or is it simply sampling bias? Right? And it's important to know whether when you're dealing with the sample, whether in fact you've got just random changes to the sampling, or it's a real difference. But what more important than statistical significance is, does it change the business decision? So let's look at the chart here where we have uncertainty on the vertical and value at risk on the horizontal. So uncertainty is, am I certain what to do? That's in the bottom. Or am I uncertain what to do? That's the top, that's high. And value at risk is low. It doesn't really matter. I can either, it won't make a big difference, or I can recover very quickly. To high, that it's high risk. A lot of value will be destroyed if I make the wrong decision. And the point about business significance is we want to be focusing in that top corner. We want to be helping management where there's high uncertainty and it matters. There's high value at risk. Because that's where you get business significance. That's where someone's saying, I'm not sure what to do and it matters. And that's where we want to think about our pricing analysis. Conversely, right, on the bottom corner, you use judgment, where there's low uncertainty, low value at risk. Now, I'm not saying that low uncertainty means that the person's necessarily right. But if a manager says, I'm very confident in what I need to do, and I'm going to do it no matter what your analysis shows, right, then let them make that decision on judgment, because there's not going to be any business significance. You're not going to change their decision. Focus on the top right-hand corner. And why is BS more important than statistical significance? Because sometimes you won't have as much data as you'd like. And so you may have an issue with how good is the analysis. But if you're a manager and you have a decision to make, and you have to make a decision. Now, sometimes you can defer it, you can gather more data, and I'm not saying not to do that. But if you have to make a decision, you need to make it now. You need to make the best decision you can with the data available to you. And better to use what data you have, even if it's not as robust as you'd like, than to make a fact-free decision. And that's the importance of business significance. Now, one of the things I like, then are we doing enough work here, as you can see, and are we doing too much work in the bottom left-hand corner? Now, one thing that brings that home is a great book by Len Lodish at Wharton. Now, he titled it The Advertising and Promotion Challenge, but it could also be The Pricing Challenge, because the real title of the book is second line, vaguely right or precisely wrong. And what he says is we often look for precise measures, right, and where we can get precision and that makes us comfortable, than vagueness, even if the vagueness is better. So in order to make, for example, a pricing decision, you need to have variability in your data. If there's no variability, it's going to be very hard to figure out what the elasticity is. And yet, often we see people, seen people make pricing decisions where they say, I've got lots and lots of data, right? From Nielsen or IRI, for example, lots and lots of data, and therefore there's a lot of precision. And they forget that with the lack of variability, what they're getting is a precisely wrong answer, or very small variations in the data get blown up, rather than saying, maybe I should use some market research or something that's a bit vaguer, doesn't have the precision, doesn't have the volume of data, but is more likely to give me a right answer because I can have variability in that data set. So a book I definitely recommend if you can get your hands on to read. It's a very easy read. Now moving on to actual pricing examples. And so my most important lesson is what I've written here. Ignorant competitive pricing is an oxymoron. So you walk in, and whether it's the sales force or it's the managers, and they say, my customers are incredibly price sensitive. Any change in price and I'm gone. I'm sure many of us have heard this. The reality is a bit more nuanced, right? So sometimes the customer says, what price increase? They're not aware of it. So you test whether they're aware of the price increase. Because if you're not aware of it, how can it influence your behavior? Right. Second, right, they don't know what the benchmark is. They think competitors' price is different from what it really is. And so their basis for judging your price increase will be different. They don't want to take action. Or, as in the last point, there's just inertia, right? It's just not worth the trouble. And so when you factor these in, what you see is that in many cases that what you were worried about in terms of a price war or competitor or a high elasticity is not the case. So let's look at a couple of examples of that. Right. So this is an example, I believe this was in telecoms, right? When we tested people about, are you aware of the last price change? 38% said, what price change? And I don't recall any price change. Of the 62% who were aware of it, right, only 87% didn't bother to shop, right? Those who shopped, most didn't move. So you only had 4% of the 62%, right? Or less than 3% of the population deciding that they were going to move and take action on this, right? And so assuming that everybody is a compulsive price sensitive shopper, is a mistake usually. Here's another example. This is from banking, right? This is CD renewal. Banks will tell you, particularly retail branch managers, that you have to be very competitive because there are, in fact, a segment of the population that will go out there, and when their CD is up for renewal, they will contact, sometimes walk, sometimes online, 5-6 banks, look for exactly the best rate and move at the slightest difference, a quarter point. But when we look at this example, you see that, in fact, most people just sort of renewed, right? Looked at the renewal rate, but didn't shop, didn't do anything. And then of the 36% that actually shopped, right, only 15% moved to a different bank. So again, an example where, yes, you would think that everybody is price sensitive, or at least you'd be told that, and not the case when you actually do a bit of research to find out how people actually react. Right. And why is that? Because there's things that are more important than pricing. Pricing's important, but if we look at banking, right, proximity, trust in the brand, it's convenient, etc., can be more important than that quarter or half a point on their CD. Right. Here's another example. This one from telecoms. This is on international calling rates. Right. Do you know the price of the most often called international route? This is 70% said no. I don't know what the price is. Right. Of the 30% who said, I know what the price is, most of them overstated it, right, and found the price to be reasonable. So often what you've got is a real misperception. So it's not even the absolute price that matters, it's the perceived price that matters. And are you changing the perceived price? So this is one of my favorite examples where understanding both the shopping process and price misperception created a terrific opportunity. This is back to banking. You can see that 100 was the previous price. Right? We asked people what they thought the price was. It was 3 times what the actual fee was. Right? We asked them what competitors' prices were, and they gave us a number somewhere between twice and 4 times what our fee was. Right? So the bank doubled the fee, right? Promoted the new price because it was perceived as a reduction because people thought the reality was 3 times, not 2 times. Now, you're not going to find many of those, but when you do find them, they're golden because you created a positive perception among your customers about your price position at the same time that you've improved your margin. This is a rare example, but probably less rare than you might think when you actually understand people's perceptions, particularly in light of their competitive perception. So here's the way you would rapidly do it. Here are the questions you'd ask. This is something that can be done very quickly. And here's the funnel, if you will, that you go through. I'm leaving this for those who want to look at afterwards the detail. But what you get is this grid here, which says, let's think about high potential value. So if you change a fee, does it get you a lot of money or is it not that important? And the risk of losses, right, from low to high. And there's stuff that's low and high. Quick wins, just do it, right? You don't even need to do the research, right? There are usually so many different prices you have to worry about that you can't research everyone. So there's ones where you say on judgment, we think it's unlikely, and you can always be dynamic about it. And if you do see an unexpected reaction, roll the price back. And then you've got the ones in the middle where you say, I'm not sure about the risk, so let me go do the research and figure out where the perceptions are. And then the ones that are high risk, and you defer that and probably have to do more extensive research, a conjoint or something like that, or have lots of variable data before you can make the call. But often if you just look at the top left-hand box and the middle box, that gets you substantial opportunity in pricing opportunities with clients. Now, when you do that extensive research, what you find out, as in point 5, is that price demand curves are kinky. They're not smooth. Right? So economists will tell you it's a nice smooth demand curve, and by economic rationale, they should be. Right? The reality is they're not. In fact, you see here that there's a kink in the curve at $1.89. So you can see both the contribution of the variable profit and the volume at $1.89, that as you drop to $1.79, the volume goes up and your profit goes up. Between $1.89 and $2.29, and this is a simplified version, but basically your volume and your contribution are constant. Now, you realize that if your price goes up and your volume doesn't change that much, you should have some increase in contribution. So obviously there's some downward slope to the curve, but the reality is you're sitting there, if you're a marketer at the current price, and you're saying that's a bad place to be. Either I should be further out, 219, 224, because at that point my margin will go up, or I should go down below $1.89. In this case, the client went below $1.89 because there was substantial elasticity. And we also understood what was driving the elasticity, so we were sure that it was, even in a dynamic situation, that even with competitive price changes, they would still have a substantial increase in volume. But the key point here is that don't draw smooth demand curves. Don't fit your curves to smooth demand curves. And that's often what pricing software does, which is to say it tries to fit things to a smooth curve so it smooths out the kinks. In fact, what you want to understand is where the kinks are. So here's another example. And this was an interesting one because this one showed the trade-off in terms of the pricing for a large size product when there was a medium and a small size. And the conventional wisdom at the client was that we want each size to offer a cents per ounce discount so that the cents per ounce on medium is better than the small, and the cents per ounce on the large and the super large are better than the medium and the large. And what this showed us is that's actually not the case here, that there is not the elasticity when you raise the price above the cents per ounce. Now, someone would argue, well, that doesn't make any sense, because why would you pay a cents per ounce premium for a large bottle? You would just buy 2 small bottles. And again, I like to sort of verify with understanding of customer behavior. And in this case, what we learned is that the people who bought the large bottle used a lot of the product, and they didn't want a lot of small bottles around. So for them, there was utility in having a large bottle. And if that meant they paid a little bit cents per ounce premium, it was worth it for them. And obviously that was a big finding for the client, because it went from offering a discount to offering, and we're talking about a slight premium in cents per ounce, but for them, it made a big difference in their margins. And you can use the same approach for looking at relative price. So this is one where we're looking at a branded product versus private label. And what's interesting about this analysis, and behind this is brand price trade-off analysis, is when we looked at the relative price we're able to say, here's where we were, the former. This is where we should be. This is best for us as the manufacturer. Because it's private label, we're also dealing with the retailer. We could actually show the retailer, and it was obviously a different curve, but we could show them their curve as well, and basically say, look, you will and we will make more money if we have a different price gap, if we reduce the price gap of private label versus the branded product, and it's better for both of us. So by looking for the kinks in the demand curve, and you can see a former was clearly not where a kink was, and therefore you shouldn't be at that pricing level if you can avoid it. So demand curves aren't smooth. Don't expect them to be smooth. In fact, look for identify the kinks, because that's where the opportunities are. Sixth, segment. There's not one segment out there which says price is the only thing that matters, and I'm incredibly price sensitive. And as I say it at that, most people are probably nodding their head. But in fact, when you actually look at how people go about their product design and then think about the pricing for the different segments behind the products, they often miss that opportunity. So here's another example for financial services. This is one where it was in Asia. It was a dominant, they had a dominant position. They probably couldn't grow share, and if they had, it might have raised antitrust issues. So the question is, how do you improve your profitability? And in this case, we said, let's understand the different segments out there and make sure that our pricing is capturing surplus from the segments that are less price sensitive. So you can see here that, in fact, right, not all segments were equally price sensitive. You look at the first segment, the price hunters, right, better interest rate was exactly what they wanted. Right. Second segment, you see we described as the speed seeker. For them, express approval was important. And if they paid a quarter point, a half a point, 3/4 of a point more, that was acceptable if they got express approval. Then we have incentive seekers. In this case, you got a cash rebate, which people use to pay moving and relocation expenses, which often they were strapped when they had made the full mortgage payment. So the incentive was important to them. And then there were people who were more worried about prepayment because they didn't think they'd stay very long. Now, why is this important? Because you set different prices for different segments. Particularly, you set a lower price for price hunters. But in order to make that product unappealing to the other segments, you say, yes, you can have a lower price, but you're going to have slower approval. You don't have prepayment flexibility. You don't get a cash rebate. So you take away the things that makes it valuable to the other segments, which allows you to charge the other segments a higher margin, right? So 6th point is, when you're thinking about price, think about what your segments are, and then create products that capture the price sensitive customers by denying them the things that are less important to them but are important to the other segments. And in this case, you can see that they took key initiatives behind the segmentation. And what's interesting is they were able to retain customers and improve margins, because by putting the new products out there, they were able to improve the pricing, the margin for the non-price sensitive customers. They didn't want to improve share, as I said before, because they were worried about antitrust issues. What they wanted to do was have a more profitable product mix, which, as this chart showed, they were able to achieve. 7th point, test. Now, this is an example from Capital One. Anybody from the US will know Capital One. They're very good at their direct marketing testing. Why do I show this? Because in order to understand what your price sensitivity is, when you can do it, which in many cases you can, you put small tests out in the market. So Capital One's very good at this, and I'm just going to take you through. This is my statement from Capital One. You can see here is a auto loan right at 2.99%. You can be sure that there's 2.49 and 3.49 and lots of other price points that they're testing to figure out for different segments what should be the pricing. And the way they capture that is they run constant tests. They'll tell you that they run tens of thousands of tests a year. And so as I go through, you can see, again, that there's a code on the 2.99, right? But then you can see that there's other offers, and they've got different codes. So within the same statement, they've got lots of different tests going on. Going down to another one, here's another test that they have, right? So you can see within a single statement, right, they've got lots of different things. Some of them are obviously price sensitivity testing. Some of it is other actions. Why is this important? Because when you test, you learn. And when you learn, you get better pricing. So this is an example, not from Capital One. This is some work done in actually Australia a while ago. And you can see that by doing testing and testing things out and then putting those improvements into the control offer, that there was a substantial improvement in performance. So why do you test? You test to learn. You test because when you test and then continue to learn, you will have much better performance. 8, know your data. Again, this is one of those things, sort of, as Americans would say, like motherhood and apple pie. But in many cases, we don't. So these are some funny examples, but all true. There was one client, and we started looking at their customer data, and they had 9 different codes for gender. And initially, we assumed that not a problem. We'll go in there and find out the codes 3 to 9 aren't populated. They're just in the field by some programming error. Nope. A third of the people were in codes 3 to 9. So we never understood why those were there. Obviously, that meant that that data was questionable. Certainly 3 to 9, we had no data on gender, and even 1 and 2 was questionable. Different situation, occupation codes. This is a client where code 1 was agriculture, and 60% of people were farmers. Now, this country, 60% of people are not farmers. I don't think there's any country in the developed or even the developing world where you've got 60% as farmers, at least certainly not most. This was clearly not the case here. We knew this was wrong. This case, we were able to figure out why it was wrong, which is that the sign-up form that the sales rep had to complete required that they get things like occupation code. Sales rep didn't want anything to interfere with making a sale. So code 1 was agriculture. They just basically answered the questions without asking the customer the questions. And that hence the data was inaccurate. So again, it was data we couldn't use. More to the point is the last one, which is you're starting to do your segmentation and do your direct marketing. How many people can you actually contact? Another example here, and when we actually looked at the contact data for the client, 50% of it was incorrect. So 50% of the marketing efforts they thought were reaching customers weren't, which they've been unaware of. They knew sort of in aggregate there were many people, many bounce backs or whatever, but not realizing it was that high. That's important in knowing your data. Now, let me bring it back into pricing, and this is where we start talking about averages, because a lot of time in pricing, we talk about averages. And you've probably seen some version of this, which is the person who says, their head is on the block of ice and their foot is in the fire, and they say, on average, I feel fine, but obviously they're not fine, right? They're freezing and they're burning. So the average is meaningless. Now, one I like better is from a client years ago, and he said, well, let me give you a better example of why averages are meaningless. He said, on average, I am a tremendous golfer. I apologize for the visual here. The green is a little bit misplaced, but he says, on average, I hit the ball right down the fairway, right onto the green. And if this was a better visual, it would show you going right near the cup. Right? So on average, I'm a great golfer. He said, reality is I'm a lousy golfer. Half my shots go one way, half my shots go the other way. And that's why the average is meaningless. Right? There is a terrific book called The Flaw of Averages. So a takeoff on the law of averages by Sam Savage. And it provides examples, some of which are pricing examples, some of which are more broadly customer analytic answers. And it just talks about why you have to be aware of averages. And again, when we look at an average price, we don't want an average price. We want to have a price for the price sensitive segment. We want to have a price for different other segments based on ability to create product market variations that capture additional surplus. Last, so let me come back to then focusing on business significance. Right? And so point is to focus on what will be useful. And what this means is that there's not a standard set of analyses or a standard approach you should use, right, in many, maybe even most situations. Rather, you have to understand the decisions that the client is going to make and how they're going to use your pricing analysis. So I'm going to use churn modeling here because I have a very good example, but it would apply equally with pricing. So often people say, I want a churn model. So I want to know when contract renewal comes up on my mobile phone, who's going to churn, how many people are going to churn, and I want to predict who's going to churn so that I can then take marketing actions to reduce the churn rate. Right? And so people will build churn models and say, should I predict who will churn? Well, maybe. Right? Maybe what's actually more useful is to predict what carrier they will churn to, even if that, right, to the earlier point, is vaguely right. Right? Why? Because in this case, the client had different offers targeted at the different competitors. There were 3 competitors in the market, so they had 2 competitors dealt with, and they had a very different offer because they thought that the reason someone would transfer to one of the competitors is very different from the other. So they had a very different offer. So what was more important to them was understanding which carrier you churn to so they could then get the right offer to the right customer. And that was less important than predicting who would churn. Right? Maybe you just sit there and say, well, I don't have specific offers for specific customer groups or not predefined customer groups, but what I want to do is predict who will respond to a churn offer. Because if someone is definitely going to churn, right, I actually don't want to waste any marketing effort on them. They're going to leave regardless. If I know that there's a 100% likelihood that they're going to leave, then there's very little I can do to change that. And the same thing at the other end, where it's 0% chance of churn, your loyal customers. You don't really want to annoy them with a lot of retention calls when they like you, they love you, and they're not going to leave. So you want to think about what are the offers you'd make, and then who would respond to the offer, right? Obviously there should be a risk of churn, right? So someone might respond, but if they're in the middle of their contract, you don't want to send it to them. But if they're at the end of the contract and you think that the software will reduce their churn, that's actually a more useful example. And again, bringing it back to pricing, you want to think about, right, targeting as to what different price offers you have and how you're going to communicate that to people, so that what you do is deliver the right pricing offers for that market, that region, that customer, depending on how you target your customers, rather than getting caught in the average. And the last point is sometimes you want to do nothing because it doesn't matter. So the reason I like this example is in asking the client, well, how do you use your churn model? Because I can give you a better churn model, but let's think about how you use it. And in this case, I said, well, we call everybody at contract renewal. Everybody whose contract is up, we call them, we have a standard offer. It has different price levels to it, but it's the same offer that we give to everyone. Right? And if they don't respond to that, we call them a second time. Everybody. And if they don't respond to that, we call them a third time. Everybody. So you're calling everybody 3 times with the same offer. I said, so why do you need a churn model? So, well, sometimes we get to that third call and we run out of calling capacity for the month. So we have to decide who gets the third call and who doesn't get the third call. And so that's when we use the churn model to figure out who should get those calls. Well, at that point, you're going to have the ability to have impact is very low. You've already harassed them twice. They've said no, and you're reaching them the third time. And so in this case, I said, you don't need a better churn model, you need a better churn process, and then you could use a better model. Again, let's bring that back to pricing. If the client says, no matter what you tell me, I'm going to raise the price, right? Whether or not they should, right? You can argue whether or not they should, but if they're confirmed firm in their knowledge of what they're going to do, or in their opinion what they're going to do, then don't waste your time giving them a demand curve for that product. Focus on those areas, going back to that chart earlier, where they have high uncertainty and it matters. So focus on the areas where they're not sure what to do, rather than trying to argue something where they feel very confident, and they'll probably feel that even if you came up with a counter, the analysis suggested doing something else, they'd probably say, well, there's problem data flaws or whatever. Excuse me. So that's the 9th point, which is have a discussion and focus on what will be useful, which means what will be used and will have impact. And last point then, coming into the Q&A, is ask questions. So if you need to understand what's will be used, therefore what's useful, what's valuable, where there are questions, you need to ask a lot of questions of your client. Going in and saying, I've got a standard package of price analyses, let me do them, and I'll give you the findings, and I'll tell you what the answer is not going to get you to the best work for your client. You have to ask a lot of questions, and so with that in mind, let me turn it over to Dr. Laura and give a summary and then take questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. You have summarized all the pricing best practices in these 10 second points. I especially like the last point which you've mentioned, which is ask questions. And I think it's more important than what people usually realize this to be. And I've worked with few clients who really believed in this, and they tell me that pricing is actually not a destination, it's a journey. And customer behavior is constantly changing, your competitive landscape is changing, what customer needs is also constantly changing. So you need to know your market, know your customers very well, and also need to understand how customers are changing, and therefore you need to question your strategies a lot. Go back and question your strategies. Am I doing it right? Can I do it better? How can I do it better? And in that context, I thought your last point is probably one of the most important points that you have mentioned in your set of 10 points.
Well,
Uh,
thank you very much. And let's see what questions we have from others in the audience.
yes, let's look at the questions posted by the audience.